She walked into a board meeting with $40 million on the line, a spine made of steel, and the reputation of a woman who had never once begged for anything in her life. Then she showed up at a stranger's door at 2 a.m, soaking wet, barefoot, shaking, and whispered, "Please don't send me away." Vivian Cross, CEO, billionaire, the most feared woman in American tech, wearing a widowed single father's old blue shirt, and nothing else. If you're watching from Chicago, New York, Houston, or anywhere across this country tonight, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story is only getting started, and you do not want to miss what happens next. The thunder hit at 2:07 in the morning. Noah Bennett knew the exact time, because he had just looked at the clock above the kitchen stove, the one with the cracked plastic frame that Sophie had broken 2 Christmases ago, and that he kept telling himself he'd replace, but never did. He was standing in his kitchen in sweatpants and a faded university t-shirt, drinking a glass of water, unable to sleep, the way he couldn't sleep most nights since Claire died. The thunder rattled the windows. Rain hammered the roof so hard, it sounded like someone was throwing gravel at the house. The whole neighborhood had gone dark 20 minutes ago when the power blinked out, and now the only light in Noah's kitchen was the yellow glow of the battery-powered camping lantern his daughter had insisted they keep on the counter ever since she watched a documentary about tornadoes. Sophie's idea. Sophie's lantern. Sophie thought of everything, which was terrifying for a 7-year-old and heartbreaking for her father, who understood exactly why she did it. He was halfway through his glass of water when someone knocked on his front door. Not knocked. Knocked. The kind of knocking that wasn't really knocking at all, it was hitting. Desperate and fast, 3 quick strikes followed by a pause, then 3 more. Like whoever was on the other side had spent the last 30 seconds arguing with themselves about whether to do this at all and had finally just decided to commit. Noah set his glass down on the counter. For a moment he didn't move. It was after 2 a.m. during a storm that the weather app had called potentially dangerous, and someone was at his front door, and every reasonable part of his brain told him this was either a very bad situation or a very bad situation. He picked up the lantern and walked to the door anyway. Who's there? Silence. Just the rain. I'm not opening this door until you tell me who's there. A pause. Then a voice barely audible through the wood and the storm. It's Vivian Cross. Noah's hand went still on the doorknob. He knew that name. Of course he knew that name. The entire city knew that name. Vivian Cross was the founder and CEO of Crosswell Technologies, one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country. A 29-year-old woman whose face had been on the cover of Forbes twice, and Wired once. A woman who was famous not just for being brilliant, but for being immovable. The kind of executive who made grown men in $1,000 suits sweat through their collars just by looking at them across a conference table. Noah had met her exactly twice. The first time she had walked through a renovation site at Crosswell's headquarters, without looking at him. Once speaking only to her assistant, pointing at things, and issuing corrections in a voice so flat and precise, it reminded him of a surgeon explaining which organ they were about to remove. The second time she had asked him a single direct question about load-bearing walls, he had given her an honest answer, not the answer she seemed to want, but the true one, and she had looked at him for exactly 3 seconds with an expression he couldn't read before walking away. That was 6 months ago. And now she was at his door. At 2 a.m, during a storm. He opened it. The woman standing on his porch was Vivian Cross. He knew that immediately because he recognized her face. But everything else about her looked like someone had taken that face and placed it on a completely different person. Her evening gown, dark green silk. The kind of thing that probably cost more than Noah's monthly mortgage payment, was soaked through and clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair, which he had only ever seen pulled back in sleek professional arrangements, hung in thick wet ropes over her shoulders. Her feet were bare. Actually bare on his porch, with November rain blowing sideways, and the temperature hovering just above 40 degrees. She was holding a small overnight bag in one hand, and what appeared to be a completely destroyed smartphone in the other. The screen was shattered and dark. One heel was missing from one shoe, and the shoe itself was dangling from 2 fingers like she didn't quite know what to do with it anymore. But none of that was the thing that stopped him. The thing that stopped him was her eyes. Vivian Cross, in every photograph, in every conference room, in every media appearance, had eyes like cut glass. Sharp. Clear. Cold in the way that very controlled people are cold, not empty, but sealed. He had noticed that even during the 30 total seconds they had spent in each other's presence. Right now, her eyes were something else entirely. Right now, her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been running. I know this is... Her voice cracked. She pulled it back together. I know how this looks. Come inside. I don't want to. I'm not trying to... She stopped, started again. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Ms. Cross, come inside, right now. She came inside. He put the lantern on the kitchen table and gestured for her to sit. She didn't sit. She stood in the middle of his kitchen, dripping water onto his linoleum floor, holding that broken phone and looking around the room like she wasn't quite sure where she was or how she had gotten there. Noah went to his bathroom closet and came back with 2 towels and handed them to her without a word. Then he put a kettle on the stove, because the gas burners still worked, even when the power didn't. She took the towels, but didn't use them, just held them. You need to get warm. I'm fine. You're shivering. I'm not. And then she looked down at her own hands and went quiet because her hands were shaking visibly, trembling against the ruined fabric of the towels, and there was no version of that which could be explained away. Sit down, Noah said, not harshly. She sat down. The tea is going to take a few minutes. Are you hurt? Physically, are you injured? No. Did someone... I'm not hurt. Okay. He sat down across from her at the table. Then I'm going to ask you one question, and depending on your answer, I'll figure out what to do next. Okay. She looked at him. Something in her face was calculating even now, even in this state, assessing whether he was safe, whether this was a trap, what the angle was. Are you in immediate danger? Like right now in the next 20 minutes, do I need to be worried about someone showing up at this door? The calculating look held for another second. Then she said, no, not tonight. All right. He stood up and went back to the stove. Then we can talk when you're ready, or we don't have to talk at all. It was Sophie who undid everything. Noah had checked on his daughter twice since the storm started, once before the power went out, once after, and Sophie had been asleep both times, curled around her stuffed elephant named Gerald, completely undisturbed by the thunder, the way only deeply exhausted children can be. But sometime around 2:30, while Vivian was sitting at his kitchen table, with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, still not talking, still wearing her wrecked evening gown, Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing her dinosaur pajamas. Her hair was a mess. She had Gerald tucked under one arm. She looked at the strange woman sitting at her kitchen table, and then looked at her father, and then looked back at the strange woman. Why is there a lady in our kitchen? Sophie, go back to bed. Is she okay? She looks like she got rained on. She did get rained on. She's fine. Go back to bed, Soph. Sophie took 2 steps into the kitchen instead. She studied Vivian with the absolute unfiltered scrutiny that only small children and federal investigators can deploy without embarrassment. Her shoes are broken. I know. One of them is just a heel. That's just a heel that's not even a shoe anymore. Sophie, are you sad? Sophie asked, addressing Vivian directly. You look like how I look when I'm trying not to cry. My dad says it's okay to cry, but I still try not to sometimes anyway. Vivian Cross, the CEO of a $2 billion company, looked at this 7-year-old in dinosaur pajamas and said absolutely nothing for 3 full seconds. Then her jaw tightened, and she pressed her lips together, and she looked away toward the dark window. I'm okay, she said. Thank you for asking. That's what everyone says when they're not okay, Sophie told her gravely. You can cry if you want. We won't tell anyone. Sophie. Noah's voice was gentle but final. Gerald looks tired. Sophie looked down at the elephant. He does look kind of tired. She looked up at Vivian once more. My name is Sophie. If you're still here in the morning, I'll show you my rocks collection. I have 43 rocks, and I know where every single one of them came from." "That sounds impressive." "It is very impressive." Sophie agreed with complete sincerity. Then she turned around and padded back down the hallway. The kitchen was quiet again. After a long moment, Vivian said, "She's remarkable." "She is," Noah agreed. "Her mother was remarkable too." He hadn't meant to say that. It just came out. He saw Vivian register it, the past tense, the weight of it, and saw her choose not to ask, which he respected more than he expected to. He gave her his bedroom. It wasn't a discussion. He pulled out clean towels, pointed her toward the bathroom, found a dry t-shirt and an old pair of sweatpants in the back of his drawer, and put them on the bathroom counter without comment, and told her he was going to sleep on the couch, where he could hear if Sophie woke up again. She tried to object, and he didn't let her. "You're not taking my bedroom," Vivian said. "This is your house." "The couch is fine." Noah. It was the first time she had used his first name. They both noticed it. "Ms. Cross," he said, "you showed up at my door in the middle of a storm with one shoe. The least I can do is give you a bed. We'll talk in the morning if you want. If you don't want, we won't. Either way, you're safe here tonight." She went still at that word. Safe. Like it was something she hadn't heard in a while. Like the word had a shape she'd forgotten. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." He picked up the lantern. "Bathroom's on the right. There's an extra blanket in the closet. Shout if you need anything." He left her in the hallway and went to the couch. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to the rain, slow down, and eventually stopped listening to his daughter breathe evenly in her room, listening to the old house settle, and thinking about a woman with cut glass eyes that weren't cut glass anymore, standing barefoot on his porch in November, saying I didn't have anywhere else to go. He thought about what that meant. Not the logistics of it, the why, the how, the what happened. Those could wait. I thought about what it meant that Vivian Cross, who could buy a hotel, or call security, or contact half a dozen people with the resources to handle any situation, had ended up at his door. A modest house in a regular neighborhood, a widowed construction site supervisor, a 7-year-old in dinosaur pajamas. He thought about that for a long time. She was standing at his bedroom window when he came to check on her at 6 in the morning. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He opened the door, and there she was. She had used the clothes he'd left out, his old blue shirt size large, reaching to mid-thigh on her paired with the sweatpants she'd rolled up at the ankles. Her hair was dry now, loose around her shoulders, and without the evening gown, without the silk and the heels, she looked younger than he expected. Not young in a fragile way. Young in the way of someone who had built so many layers of armor over themselves that when the armor came off, the actual person underneath was a surprise. Her eyes were swollen. She had been crying at some point in the night privately, which he decided not to mention. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little." She turned from the window. "A little," he said, which was a lie, and they both understood that. She looked at the shirt she was wearing. "I found this in the drawer. I hope that's—" "It's fine. I should have asked." Vivian. First time he'd used her name. She noticed that too. "It's a shirt. It's fine." She nodded slowly. Then she looked at him. Actually looked at him. Not the controlled CEO assessment he'd seen in the conference room, but something more direct and more uncomfortable, like someone taking off sunglasses they'd been wearing so long they forgot they had them on. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay. I need you to know that I didn't come here because—" She stopped. "I didn't come here because I thought you could solve this. I'm not looking for someone to fix anything. I came here because you're the only person I could think of who I actually trust. And I know that's strange because we barely know each other, and I know this was an imposition, and I—" "Vivian." She stopped. "You don't have to justify it," he said. "You don't owe me an explanation for showing up. I showed up at your house at 2 in the morning. You were in trouble, and you needed somewhere to be. That's not something you need to apologize for." She looked at him for a long time. "I'm not used to that," she said finally. "I know." "How do you know?" Because the people who are used to it don't feel like they have to explain it when they ask for help. That landed somewhere in her. He saw it. She didn't respond to it directly, just turned back to the window for a moment, jaw set, composing herself in the way that people compose themselves when someone says something true that they weren't ready for. His name is Julian Mercer. She said it without preamble, standing in his kitchen 45 minutes later while he made breakfast, and Sophie sat at the table sorting through a Ziploc bag of rocks, explaining each one to Vivian in a patient and comprehensive way that Vivian was actually listening to. Noah kept cooking, but he was listening. We were engaged for 2 years, Vivian continued. I ended it 8 months ago. I thought, she paused. I thought it was over. It's not over. No. Sophie held up a piece of dark gray stone. This one is granite. I found it at my grandma's house. Granite is one of the hardest rocks there is. I know, Vivian said. That's actually correct. Granite rates about a 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Sophie stared at her. You know about rocks? A little. Do you know what schist is? Metamorphic rock, formed under heat and pressure. Sophie's jaw dropped. She turned to Noah. Dad, she knows about schist. I heard, Noah said. Most people don't know what schist is. My teacher thought I made it up. It's a very real rock. Vivian confirmed. Sophie immediately moved her chair 3 inches closer to Vivian. Noah watched this happen and felt something in his chest shift quietly, like a piece of furniture being moved in a room he'd kept locked. He concentrated on the eggs. Tell me about Julian, he said. And Vivian told him. She talked for almost an hour. Sophie finished breakfast and went to watch cartoons, and Vivian sat at Noah's kitchen table with both hands around a mug of coffee and talked in the precise, controlled way of someone who had been very carefully not talking about something for a very long time. Julian Mercer. Old money, old name, old habits. He had come into Vivian's life 4 years ago through a mutual business connection, charming and attentive, in a way that she had been too guarded to fully trust at first, then gradually worn down by. He was supportive of her career. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. He attended events, met with board members, positioned himself as the partner behind the CEO. He said the right things in public. He made her feel for the first time in her adult life like someone was choosing to stand beside her without any ulterior motive. Except every single thing was a motive, Vivian said. I just didn't see it until later. By the time I could see it clearly, he had his hands in everything. He had access to her personal devices, not because he had forced it, but because she had given it to him voluntarily. Trust by trust over 2 years. Each individual step feeling reasonable, and the cumulative picture not becoming visible until she stepped all the way back. He knew her board contacts. He had cultivated relationships with 3 of her senior executives behind her back. He controlled her social calendar in ways she had initially experienced as helpfulness, arranging meetings, managing invitations, gently steering her away from certain people before she understood the pattern. I isolated you, Noah said. Gradually. Yes. Her voice was even, precise, like she was giving a presentation. By the time I ended the engagement, I had fewer close connections than I'd had in years, and the ones I did have were people he had approved of in some way. My attorneys, a few business contacts, people who were useful to me professionally, not people who actually... She stopped. People who were actually your friends. Yes. How did you find out? He got careless, or maybe he got confident, maybe that's a better word. I found messages, communications he'd had with one of my senior VPs coordinating, using information. I had told him privately in confidence to influence decisions in my own company. Her hands tightened on the mug. He was so certain I wouldn't leave, so certain that by that point I was too... She stopped again. Too dependent on him. Too scared, she said. He would never have called it fear. He called it love. Every time he tightened the grip, he called it love. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What happened last night at the gala?" And this is where the story changed. This is where the measured, controlled voice of Vivian Cross began to show its edges. The charity event was at the Meridian Hotel, she said. Julian wasn't supposed to be there. We've been using intermediaries for months. My attorneys contact his attorneys. Everything goes through a buffer. But he was there. He came specifically because he knew I would be, and he made sure I wouldn't know in advance. He had waited until the formal program ended, and the room had thinned out when most of the major donors had left, and the remaining guests were spread across the ballroom in smaller clusters. Then he had come to her. "How is very calm," Vivian said. "Julian is always very calm. That's one of the things I used to think I admired about him. He never raises his voice. He never—" She pressed her lips together. He cornered me near the coat check. There were still people around. Enough that making a scene would have been noticed, which he knew. He always knows. He had given her a manila envelope. Inside was documentation documents she had signed, altered communications, financial records that had been selectively edited, the full picture curated to support a single damning narrative that Vivian Cross had engaged in financial misconduct, that she had diverted funds through subsidiary accounts, that she had defrauded the company that carried her name. All fabricated, all designed to look real. "He wants control of Crosswell. I wants the company," Vivian said. "Or enough of it that he controls it effectively. He's been building toward this for 2 years. He needs my voting shares, and he knows I won't give them willingly, so he manufactured a reason for the board to remove me involuntarily and replace me with a structure he already has influence over. How much time does he need from you before he goes public with the false documents? I wants a meeting this week, a formal meeting where I sign over a controlling interest. And if you don't—" "The board receives the package by Friday." She looked up at him. "There are employees at that company, real people, people with families. If the board removes me under circumstances like these, and Julian gets what he wants—" She stopped. "What happens to them? Julian doesn't care about the company. He cares about winning. He'll dismantle parts of it, leverage the valuation cut where cutting is profitable, and burn the rest." She set the mug down. 460 people work at Crosswell. Not executives, people. People who've been there since we were operating out of a warehouse with a Wi-Fi password on a whiteboard. Noah sat back. "I couldn't go to a hotel," Vivian said. "He has eyes there, not literally, but he's connected enough that if I check in anywhere it reaches him. I couldn't go to the penthouse. He knows that address, and I wasn't willing to be alone there. I couldn't contact anyone from work without risking that it gets back to him, or panics people before my attorneys have a chance to—" She exhaled. "I needed somewhere to be for one night. Just one night where I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. And you came here. You were honest with me. At the construction site. Do you remember I asked you about the load-bearing wall on the 3rd floor? The timeline we had given you was impossible, and everyone else was telling me it could be done, and you just—" She made a gesture. "You just said no. You said it couldn't be done on that timeline without compromising the integrity of the work, and you said it in front of 3 of my own project managers, who had already told me the opposite. I remember. None of them were going to tell me the truth because they were afraid of me, and you just—" She shook her head slightly. "You told me the truth. I didn't know what to do with that at the time. I was irritated, actually. I wanted the problem to be solvable." "It wasn't. No, it wasn't." She looked at him steadily. "I came here because you're the only person I could think of who doesn't want anything from me. No position, no contract, no access. You just told me the truth because it was true." Noah held her gaze for a long moment. "I'm glad you came," he said. She looked uncertain, like she wasn't quite sure what to do with that either. "My attorneys are working on it," she said, reverting to logistics, which he recognized as her way of retreating to ground she could control. "I have access to archived communications internal records that may corroborate what Julian has been doing. But it takes time to build a case, and time is what I don't have." "How many days?" "If he follows the pattern he's established, I have until Thursday. Maybe Friday morning at the outside." Noah looked at the clock on the stove with the cracked frame. "Monday, 7:14 a.m. 4 days." "Then stay," he said. She blinked. "Stay here. Use the room. We'll sort out the logistics. Sophie's school schedule, my work schedule. We'll figure it out. You can work from here. Your attorneys can reach you here. And Julian. Julian doesn't know you exist." Vivian said very quietly. I've been careful about that. She caught herself. I've been careful about not letting him know about anyone I actually... She stopped. The sentence she didn't finish hung in the kitchen. Noah let it hang there. Julian doesn't know you exist, she said again. If I'm here, you're not connected to this. You're not in his crosshairs. That's my decision to make, Noah said. Noah, my house, my decision. He stood up and picked up the coffee mugs. Sophie gets up for school at 7:30. I drive her at 8:15. You can have the room and the quiet and the Wi-Fi, and there is a lock on the door that works, and Gerald. He nodded toward the hallway. Gerald is actually very intimidating once you get to know him. Vivian stared at him. Who's Gerald? Sophie's elephant. You'll meet him again. He approved of you, I think. She moved her chair closer to you. That's basically the Sophie Bennett seal of approval. Something happened to Vivian's face. Not a smile, not quite. Something softer than that, and less practiced, and more real. You don't have to do this, she said. I know. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed. But I'm still doing it. Heimat, Sophie's lunch, while Sophie stood in the kitchen doorway, intermittently updating Vivian, who was still at the table on the full operational history and personal biography of Gerald the elephant. He has a scar, Sophie announced. On his trunk. I got him when I was 4, and I used to carry him everywhere, and one day his trunk got caught in the car door, and we had to sew it back on. So he has a scar, but my dad says that just means he's been through stuff. Your dad sounds pretty smart, Vivian said. He is pretty smart. He's also bad at making pancakes, but he tries really hard, which I think counts for something. Sophie looked at Noah with complete honesty. The pancakes are often a little burned, Dad. I'm aware, Sophie. Not all the way burned, just the edges. Sophie. I'm just being accurate. She looked back at Vivian. Do you like pancakes? I do. Maybe you can help with them. For tomorrow. I don't want to hurt his feelings, but the edges are really... Sophie. Noah pointed at the door. Shoes, coat, bag. Okay. She slid off the chair. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Vivian. You should stay for the pancakes. You don't have to leave yet. She disappeared into the hallway. The kitchen went quiet again. She's extraordinary, Vivian said. She is, Noah said. He kept his back to her, folding the paper bag. She's also very good at making people feel like they belong somewhere. She gets it from her mother. He heard the shift in the air at that, the acknowledgement, the gentle weight of it. What was her name? Vivian asked. Claire. I'm sorry. 3 years ago, he said. Brain aneurysm. She was 31. He paused. It's not something you get over. You just get used to carrying it. I think, Vivian said slowly, that might be the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me about loss. Noah finally turned around to look at her. She was still wearing his blue shirt. The morning light came through the kitchen window at a low angle and caught the edges of her hair, still loose, still soft. Nothing like the woman who had walked past him at a construction site without looking up. The swollen eyes were fading. Her hands had stopped shaking. She looked, he thought, like a person. Just a person. Which somehow felt like the most important thing he'd noticed about her since she'd knocked on his door. You should eat something, he said. I'm fine. Vivian. She looked at him. You've been running on adrenaline since last night, and you have 4 days of serious work ahead of you, and your attorney is going to need you functional. Eat something. A pause. Okay, she said. Heimat eggs. She ate them without complaint. Outside, Sophie could be heard in the hallway, narrating something to Gerald about their upcoming school day and the general unfairness of math homework. The storm had completely passed. Morning light came in clean and clear. For a single moment, Noah Bennett's house felt like something it hadn't felt like in a very long time. It felt like somewhere that held more than one person's grief. He drove Sophie to school at 8:15. In the car, Sophie was quiet for 3 blocks, which was unusual. Then she said, Is Vivian going to be here when I get home? I don't know, Soph, maybe. I want her to be. I know. She knows about rocks, Sophie said in the tone of someone who considers geological knowledge to be the definitive measure of human worth. And she looked at Gerald like he was real. Some grown-ups don't do that. Some grown-ups forget how, Noah agreed. Sophie was quiet for another block. Dad. Yeah. Are you okay? He kept his eyes on the road. Yeah, buddy, I'm okay. You don't have to say that if you're not, Sophie told him. That's what I told Vivian, and I'm telling you too. He reached over and squeezed her hand. I know, Soph. I know. He dropped her off, watched her run through the school gate with her backpack bouncing, and sat in the parking lot for a full minute before he pulled back out into traffic. Then he drove home. To his house, where Vivian Cross was sitting at his kitchen table in his blue shirt, fighting to save 460 people's jobs, and maybe starting without realizing it yet, to remember who she was before she built walls high enough to disappear behind them. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know how the next 4 days would unfold, or what Julian Mercer was capable of, or what it would cost him and Sophie if this turned into something messier than one night in a storm. But he knew what Claire had always said, back when he would hesitate in front of something that mattered. The door is already open, Noah. The only question is whether you're brave enough to walk through it. He pulled into his driveway, got out of the truck, walked to his front door, and opened it. The house was quiet when Noah walked back in, not the heavy quiet of an empty house. He knew that quiet had lived inside it for 3 years, knew every specific shade of it, the way it pressed against the walls differently in the morning than at night, the way it gathered in corners and under furniture, and in the second chair at the kitchen table that nobody sat in anymore. This was a different quiet, the kind that happens when someone is in a space but holding themselves still on purpose. He found Vivian at the kitchen table exactly where he'd left her, except now she had a laptop open and a yellow legal pad beside it, covered in neat small handwriting, and she was on the phone talking in a low controlled voice that cut off the moment he came through the door. She looked up. He held up both hands. Don't stop on my account, and went to the coffee maker. She watched him for a half second, made a decision, and kept talking. No, Marcus, I understand the timeline. What I'm telling you is that the timeline needs to move. We don't have until Friday. We have until Thursday at the outside, and I need the access logs from the Henderson building by tomorrow morning at the latest. A pause while whoever Marcus was said something. I don't care what it takes. That's what I'm paying you for. Her voice stayed flat and even. Yes. Call me at this number. Yes, it's secure. Another pause. Marcus, I know. Call me. She ended the call and set the phone on the table. Henderson Building, Noah said. That's the Crosswell satellite office on the west side. You worked on it. 2 years ago, renovation and expansion. He poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her without asking whether she wanted it. What do you need from the access logs? Julian was in that building, multiple times, after we ended the engagement. She pulled the legal pad toward her and scanned something. The physical access system logs every badge scan who enters what time, what floor. If he was in the restricted areas on the executive floor, which is where the document management system is housed, then his badge would have registered. Except he doesn't have a badge. No. She looked up. But someone gave him access. Somebody inside that building let him in, walked him through, and either forgot to log it separately, or assumed nobody would audit the main system. She tapped the legal pad. That's the thread. I pull that thread, I find out who his person is inside the company. And once I know who his person is, you know how he got the documents, and I can prove they were obtained illegally, which means anything built on top of them falls apart. She said it efficiently, like she was describing a structural problem, which in a way she was. The board can't act on evidence that was criminally obtained, even if they want to. Noah sat down across from her. How confident are you that the thread is there? 70%. And the other 30? The other 30% is the possibility that Julian is smarter than I'm giving him credit for, in which case we have a different problem. She picked up the coffee and drank without looking at it. I've been underestimating him for 4 years. I'd rather overestimate him now. That's smart. It's late, she said. The words carried something under them, not self-pity, something harder and more honest. The tone of a person making an accurate assessment of their own mistakes without flinching. It's very, very late to start being smart about Julian Mercer. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I ask you something?" She looked at him with the steady, slightly guarded expression he was beginning to recognize as her version of yes, but I reserve the right not to answer. When did you know that something was wrong? Not the messages you found before that. When did you first feel it? She held the coffee mug with both hands and was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, 14 months into the relationship, there was a dinner. A fundraiser for a children's hospital, one I had supported for years long before Julian. I was close to the woman who ran the foundation. Her name is Diane. We'd been friends since I was 24 before the company existed. What happened? Julian didn't like her. He'd never said it directly. He never said anything directly, that was the method, but there were small things. Comments about her motivations. Whether she was a genuine friend or someone cultivating access to my profile. Whether certain things she said were actually backhanded criticisms. She paused. He was very good at making me hear things differently than I'd heard them before. Like adjusting the color calibration on a screen. You don't notice the shift in the moment. You just gradually stop seeing certain things the way you used to. And at the dinner, Diane said something to me privately. She said she was worried about me. That I seemed, she used the word smaller. That I seemed smaller than I used to be. Which was a strange thing to say about someone who was by that point running a company worth $800 million. Vivian set the mug down. I was furious. I went home and told Julian what she said, and he was very sympathetic and very gentle. And over the course of that conversation, I ended up deciding that Diane had been inappropriate and presumptuous, and that I needed space from that friendship. He led you there. He walked me there one careful step at a time and made sure every step felt like my own idea. She looked at the table. I didn't speak to Diane for 7 months. By the time I ended the engagement and came back up for air, I had to call her and explain why I had essentially disappeared, which was... Her jaw tightened. That was not a conversation I enjoyed having. Did she understand? She said she had been waiting for me to call. Something in Vivian's voice shifted slightly, just a fraction, like a hair crack in a wall. She said she'd been worried the whole time, and she never stopped being my friend, even when I wasn't being hers. Noah looked at the table. Some people are built like that, he said. I know, I'm learning to recognize it. She glanced at him briefly with something in it that wasn't quite a question, but was in the neighborhood of one. He let it settle without comment. She picked up her pen and went back to the legal pad. He got up and started doing the breakfast dishes because they needed doing, and because he had learned 3 years ago that the most useful thing you can do when someone is processing something painful is give them the gift of you being ordinary nearby. Not solicitous, not hovering. Just present, doing something mundane so they don't feel like they have to perform their recovery for an audience. Claire had taught him that too, among many other things. They stayed like that for a while. Vivian, writing Noah at the sink and the kitchen, held both of them without any particular awkwardness, which felt like something worth noticing. His phone buzzed on the counter. He dried his hands and looked at it. A text from his supervisor, Ray Kowalski, asking about material deliveries for the Harmon project scheduled for Wednesday. He typed back, confirmed the delivery window, and set the phone down. Vivian looked up. Do you have to go in? Not until this afternoon. Site meeting at 2. You shouldn't change your schedule because of me. I wasn't planning to. He put the last mug in the drying rack. I'll be back before Sophie's out of school. I can... She stopped. You can what? I was going to say I can pick her up if you need, but that's... She shook her head. I don't know what I was saying. You don't know me well enough for that. You know what schist is, Noah said, and something in his voice was easy enough that the corner of her mouth moved. That's not a qualification. Sophie would disagree. He leaned against the counter. But no, I'll get her. My schedule is fine. He paused. Will you be okay here? She looked at him with the slight narrowing that meant she was deciding whether to be offended by the question. "I've been managing my own safety for 29 years, she said. "That's not what I asked." The narrowing eased. "Yes," she said. "I'll be okay." He nodded, got his jacket off the hook by the door. "There's food in the refrigerator. Help yourself to whatever. The Wi-Fi password is on the piece of paper on the refrigerator. Sophie wrote it in purple marker. You can't miss it." He paused. "Oh, and the second burner on the stove runs a little hot, so if you're cooking anything, use the front left." She stared at him. "What?" he said. "You're giving me stove instructions." "It runs hot. Noah, I could buy this house. And yet," he said, "you still don't know about the second burner." She stared at him for another second. Then she laughed. He had not seen her laugh before. He hadn't been sure she did. It was short and quiet and slightly surprised, like it had gotten out before she could decide whether to let it, and it changed her face in a way that was difficult to look away from. He picked up his keys. "I'll be back by 3, he said. He left before the moment could become something it wasn't ready to be. The second burner ran hot. This was simply true. He drove to the site meeting and told himself that was all it was. He almost believed it. The site meeting ran long because Ray had questions about the foundation inspection report that turned into a 40-minute conversation that Noah wasn't fully present, for which was not a normal experience for him. He was generally very present for site meetings. He liked the clarity of construction, the way problems were concrete and literal, the way a wall was either plumb or it wasn't, the way materials either met spec or they didn't. There was a comfort in work that had defined edges. Today, his mind kept drifting. Not dramatically. Not in the way of a man who'd lost his footing. Just sideways. Like a level that was almost true, but not quite. He kept thinking about the word smaller. What Diane had said. "You seem smaller." And the look on Vivian's face when she'd recounted it, not self-pity, but something more specific. The look of a person touching a bruise they've had so long, they almost forgot it wasn't part of them. He'd seen that look before. Not in the mirror, he didn't think he'd gotten small after Claire died. If anything, grief had made him larger in some ways, heavier, more present in his own bones, because there was nowhere to be except inside the loss. But he had seen that particular look on his mother's face once years ago, after a difficult period she had eventually walked out of. He had been young enough not to understand it then. He understood it now. Ray said his name. "Sorry." Noah pulled himself back. "Foundation report the West Corner readings." "You okay?" "Long morning." "Sophie okay?" "She's fine. She informed me again this morning that my pancakes have burned edges." Ray grinned. "She's not wrong. I'm aware." Noah picked up the inspection report. "West Corner, let's look at line 14. He got through the rest of the meeting on autopilot and drove home by 3 as promised. Sophie was still at school. He had 20 minutes. He came through the door and heard Vivian's voice from the kitchen. The low-controlled phone voice again, tighter than this morning, with an edge in it that hadn't been there before. He stopped in the hallway and waited not to eavesdrop, but to read the room before entering it. "I understand what you're saying, Marcus. What I'm asking you is whether the records actually exist, or whether we're working on an assumption." A pause. "That's not good enough. That's not no. No, I need certainty, not probability, because Julian's attorneys are going to go for every weak point, and I cannot hand them one." Another pause. "What do you mean you can't get access until tomorrow?" Her voice went very flat and very quiet, which Noah was already learning meant she was at her most serious. "Marcus, listen to me. I did not give you this retainer to tell me what you can't do. Figure out what you can." She ended the call. He waited 3 seconds and then came into the kitchen. She was sitting with her elbows on the table and her face in her hands, not crying, just holding still. The way a person holds still when they're deciding what the situation is going to cost them. He went to the refrigerator, opened it, said without turning around, "How bad?" She lifted her face from her hands. "The access logs from Henderson are incomplete. The system was updated 8 months ago, and the migration may have overwritten the older entries. Marcus is looking for backup records, but he's not." She stopped. He's not confident they exist. That's your 70% dropping to about 40. She pressed her fingers against her temples. If I can't prove Julian had physical access to the document systems, the manufactured evidence looks legitimate, and the board has no reason not to act on it. Noah stood at the open refrigerator for a moment, not actually looking at its contents, thinking. The update, he said. 8 months ago. That's what Marcus said. We did supplementary work at Henderson 8 months ago. He turned around. HVAC and electrical. I wasn't the lead, but I was on site for about 2 weeks. He was already reaching for his phone. The sub we used for the server room, we had to log every entry into the server room and the adjacent areas independently. Not the building system, our own records. Health and safety compliance, you keep your own independent entry records on restricted systems work. Vivian had gone completely still. You're saying your company's records might show who was accessing those floors. I'm saying our compliance logs would show every person who entered the restricted areas in the period we were working. And we weren't just logging our own crew. We were logging anyone who came through while we were active, because that's how liability works on active work sites. You don't want someone wandering into a work zone on a restricted floor and getting hurt, and then claiming they were never in there. He was already scrolling through his phone. If Julian was physically in that building in those areas during any 2-week period overlapping our work, he's in our records. Vivian was on her feet. Noah. I'm calling Pete. He was the lead. He'd have filed the compliance reports. He held up a finger hold on and put the phone to his ear. It rang 4 times. Pete. Hey, it's Bennett. Quick question, and I need you to be accurate. The Henderson satellite job last spring. The server room compliance logs. Do you still have them? He listened. He watched Vivian watching him. All of them, you're sure? He listened again. Pete. I need you to do me a favor. I need you to pull those logs and send them to me tonight. Yes, tonight. All of them, every entry, every date. Another pause. I know it's short notice. I know. I'll explain later. Can you do it? He listened. Thank you. Send them to my personal email. Yes. He ended the call. Vivian said nothing. He has them, Noah said. Compliance records are kept for 24 months minimum. He's going to pull them tonight and send them over. She was very still. Then, if Julian's name is in those records, then your attorneys have independent third-party documentation that he was physically present in those restricted areas. Not the company's own system. External contractor compliance records, which Julian would have had no reason to think existed and no way to interfere with. Vivian sat back down slowly, like her legs had made the decision before she did. How did you... She stopped. Construction compliance is about protecting your crew from liability. You keep records of everything. He put his phone in his pocket. I've been doing this for 11 years. You learn what documentation is worth. She looked at him across the table. Noah. Don't thank me yet. We need to see if his name is actually in there. I'm not thanking you yet, she said. I'm just... She didn't finish the sentence, but she held his gaze with something in it that she wasn't trying to control for once. Something open. Something that looked almost like what happens when a person who has been very cold for a very long time finally stands in sunlight long enough to notice. He looked away first. Not because he wanted to, because he knew what time Sophie got out of school, and he knew what it would mean if he didn't. He picked up his keys again. I'll get Sophie. There's leftover pasta in the refrigerator if you're hungry before we get back. Noah. She said his name with a different inflection this time. Quieter. He stopped. Thank you, she said. Even though you told me not to. He stood there for a moment with his hand on his jacket and his keys in his hand and the afternoon light coming in flat through the kitchen window. And he thought about a lot of things. He thought about the 70% that was now back on its way up. He thought about Pete and his compliance records and Julian Mercer's very bad decision to come after someone while construction crews were still active in his target building. He thought about what Diane had said, smaller, and how whatever Vivian Cross was right now sitting at his kitchen table in his blue shirt with a legal pad full of her own careful handwriting. She was not small. She had never been small. She had just been surrounded by people working very hard to make her believe she was. "You would have found it," he said. "The records. You or Marcus, you would have found the thread eventually." "Maybe. You're good at this." "I should be. It's my company." But there was no coldness in it this time. Just honesty. A person knowing her own worth without needing it to wound anyone. He nodded and left to get his daughter. That evening fell into something that surprised both of them, which was ordinary. Sophie came home with a backpack full of math worksheets and strong opinions about a conflict that had occurred at recess involving a soccer ball and what she described as a clear violation of established rules that nobody else seemed to care about. She explained the entire situation at the kitchen table, while Vivian, who had put her legal pad away when they came through the door, listened with genuine attention and asked exactly the right clarifying questions, not the patronizing questions that adults ask children when they're waiting for the conversation to end, but real ones, specific ones. "So the rule was that whoever kicked the ball out of bounds had to sit out for one play," Sophie said. "That was the rule everyone agreed on at the start. And Marcus the one in your class, said the rule didn't apply because the wind moved the ball. He said the wind made it go out, not him. But his foot was in contact with the ball when the wind influenced the trajectory." Sophie stopped, stared. "That's exactly what I said. I said his foot was still on it." "Shared causation," Vivian said. "The wind contributed, but so did the kick. Both were operating simultaneously." "Yes." Sophie slapped the table with small-child emphasis. "That is what I said." "Did anyone agree with you?" "Taylor agreed with me, and Devin kind of agreed with me, but then changed his mind when Marcus got upset." "Devin sounds like a pragmatist." "What's a pragmatist?" "Someone who adjusts their position based on what's useful in the moment, rather than what's accurate." Sophie considered this. "That's a very polite way to say Devin takes whichever side has more people on it." "It is," Vivian agreed. Sophie looked at Noah. "I like her. She should come to school with me." "She has her own work," Noah said. "Her work sounds hard." "It is," Vivian said. "Does it involve soccer balls?" "It involves people who behave a lot like the Marcus in your story, just in more expensive shoes." Sophie thought about this. "I'm sorry. That sounds exhausting." Vivian looked at this 7-year-old for a full second. "It really is," she said. "After dinner pasta, reheated bread from the freezer." Sophie's running commentary on every subject between ancient geology and current school politics. Sophie did her homework at the table, while Vivian sat nearby and looked over case notes, and Noah washed up. Nobody had arranged this. Nobody had assigned seats or roles. It had just happened the way things sometimes happen in houses where people are paying attention to each other without being performative about it. At 8, Noah took Sophie to get ready for bed. "Is Vivian going to sleep here again?" Sophie asked mid-toothbrush. "Probably." "Good." She spit, rinsed, examined herself in the mirror with the seriousness of someone conducting a formal inspection. "Dad." "Yeah." "She's sad. But she's not sad like sad. She's sad like someone who forgot they were allowed to not be sad." Noah looked at his daughter in the mirror. "When did you get so perceptive?" "Ms. Donovan says I have strong emotional intelligence." She paused. "I think that just means I pay attention." "I think that's exactly what it means, Soph." She turned around and hugged him around the middle, which she was still just barely tall enough to do. He hugged her back. "You're doing good, Dad," she said into his shirt. He held on to her for a second longer than usual. "Go to sleep," he said. "Gerald looks tired." "Gerald always looks tired. He has a stoic face. Good night, Sophie." "Night." He turned off her light and went back to the kitchen. Vivian was at the table with her phone in her hand and the legal pad open, but her eyes somewhere else. She looked up when he came in. "She's remarkable," Vivian said. "You keep saying that." "It keeps being true." He sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The house around them was quiet in its good way. Now the full at the end of the day quiet. The kind that happens after food and conversation and homework and small arguments about soccer ball trajectory. Vivian looked down at her phone. Marcus called while you were with Sophie. The backup records from the migration, he found fragments. Enough to corroborate a gap. Not the whole picture, but enough to show the main system was accessed from an unregistered device during the period Julian would have needed. So between that and Pete's compliance logs, if Julian's name is in Pete's records, we have two independent corroborating pieces. She exhaled slowly. It's not the full case yet, but it might be enough to force the board to pause before acting. And pause is what I need right now. Pause is... She stopped. Pause means I still have a company on Friday morning. Pete's sending the files tonight. I know. She set the phone down. My attorney is driving up tomorrow to review everything in person. Her name is Renata. She's very good. I've worked with her for 6 years. Is she someone Julian would know to look for? He knows she exists. He doesn't know where I am. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something. About why I'm here specifically. Not the practical reasons, I told you those. The real reason. Noah waited. I watched you at the Henderson job, she said. More than those 2 conversations. I watched you with your crew. The way you talked to them. There's a guy on your team. Older guy, graybeard, always wears the same green jacket. That's Frank. You spent 20 minutes one afternoon explaining something to him about the framework on the east side. Not condescending, not impatient, just explaining. Like the explanation mattered. Like he mattered. She looked at the table. And then I watched you get a phone call, and I could tell from your face that it was Sophie's school, and you excused yourself and walked away from the site to take it. And you came back 15 minutes later and went right back to work and didn't say anything about it to anyone. She paused. But your foreman, the older one, Ray, he went over to you afterward and put his hand on your shoulder for a second. And you nodded. And that was it. Noah was very still. Sophie had a rough week, he said. 3 years ago, right around the 2-year mark after Claire. Some days were harder than others. I know. I didn't know the specifics, but I knew something. Vivian lifted her eyes. I've been around a lot of powerful people, Noah. I'm one of them. And I know how we perform for each other, how we present. We never let anyone see the hard call. We never let anyone see us walk away from the site. She shook her head. You just did it, like there was nothing to perform. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. I trust you, Vivian said, because you're the only person I know who I've never once seen perform. And when you have every reason to want something from me, access advantage connection, you're sitting in your kitchen telling me about the stove burner. Her voice had something in it that he couldn't fully name. I don't know what to do with that. I genuinely don't know what to do with someone like you. The kitchen sat quiet around them. Noah looked at the table, and then at his hands, and then at her. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. You just have to let it be what it is. She was quiet for a long time. I'm not good at that, she said finally. I know. You're learning. He stood up, collecting the last of the evening cups. Pete's record should come in around 10 or 11 tonight. Try to sleep before then if you can. You're going to need your head tomorrow when Renata comes. I never sleep well before something critical. Then at least rest. He paused at the sink. The room is yours. I'll be on the couch if you need anything. You're doing it again, she said. What? Being exactly what you are. He didn't answer that. He dried his hands, turned off the kitchen light over the counter, leaving the low one above the stove, and walked toward the hallway. Noah. He stopped. You asked me this morning when I knew something was wrong, she said. The answer I gave you about the dinner, about what Diane said. Yeah, that wasn't the first time I knew. She was quiet for a moment. The first time I knew was about 6 months into the engagement. Julian said something small, the way everything he said was small. He said he wished I were a little less serious in social situations, that I came across, as he said, remote. And he said it the way someone says something they've been saving, gently, like he was doing me a favor. What did you do? I went to the bathroom, she said. And I stood in front of the mirror, and I told myself he was right, that I was remote, that I had always been remote, and he was just willing to tell me the truth. She paused. And I never once asked myself why someone who loved me would want to change that. The house was very still. Because the answer would have been too big, Noah said. Yes, Vivian said quietly. Exactly that. He stood in the doorway for a moment. For what it's worth, he said, you're not remote. You're careful. There's a difference. She said nothing. He went to the couch. Outside the neighborhood was completely quiet. The storm from the night before was nothing but damp sidewalks and the smell of wet leaves already drying in the overnight cold. Noah lay in the dark and thought about construction records and compliance logs and a man named Julian Mercer, who had looked at someone extraordinary and decided the best thing to do with her was make her smaller. Somewhere around 11, his phone lit up with an email from Pete. The compliance logs. 43 pages of entries. He opened them. He was still reading when his eyes finally closed sometime after midnight, and what he had found in those pages on page 18 on a Tuesday in April, listed in clear black print in the standardized format of a contractor compliance report, would change everything. But that was a problem for morning. Right now, his house was quiet, and Vivian Cross was sleeping in his bedroom, and Sophie was sleeping in hers with Gerald in the crook of her arm. And for one night at least, nothing bad could reach any of them in here. He closed his eyes. He let himself believe that for a little while. It was almost enough. Noah was already at the kitchen table when Vivian came out of the bedroom at 6:45. He had his laptop open. Pete's compliance logs printed out on 43 pages, stacked beside his coffee mug, and a yellow highlighter in his hand. He had been up since 5. He hadn't bothered trying to go back to sleep after finding it the name on page 18, because once he saw it, sleep became an irrelevant concept. Vivian stopped in the kitchen doorway. She was still wearing his blue shirt, sweatpants rolled at the ankles, hair loose. She looked at the printed pages and then at his face and read something there that made her go very still. You found something. Sit down, she sat. He turned to page 18 and placed it in front of her without preamble. Ran his finger along a single line. Tuesday, April 9th, 14:23 hours. Restricted floor access server room, adjacent corridor, Henderson Building. 2 names. One was a Crosswell senior VP named Daniel Cho. The other was listed as Mercer J. Guest, escorted by D. Cho, badge number 4471. Vivian looked at the line for a long time. Daniel Cho, she said. You know him. He's been with the company for 3 years, Senior VP of Infrastructure. Her voice was very even. Julian introduced us. At a dinner about 2.5 years ago. I thought it was a coincidence Julian knew people across the industry. She looked up. It wasn't a coincidence. No. Daniel has access to the document management system. Full access. Executive level. She pressed both palms flat on the table. He could pull anything. Modify metadata. Create access records that look legitimate. Which means Julian didn't just get the documents from someone inside the company, Noah said. He had someone inside who could make the documents look like they came from you. The weight of that settled between them. How defensible is this record? Vivian asked. As evidence. Third-party contractor compliance log, required by OSHA for all restricted systems work. Pete files these independently. They go to his company's compliance office, not to Crosswell. Julian had no reason to know these records existed, no way to interfere with them, and no access to alter them. Noah leaned back. In 11 years, I have never seen anyone try to tamper with contractor compliance logs, because nobody ever thinks to. They're not glamorous. They're just paperwork that protects blue-collar workers from liability. That's exactly why they're valuable, Vivian said. Exactly why. She picked up the page and held it carefully, like it was something that might change its mind about existing if handled roughly. For a moment, her face showed something unguarded, not relief exactly, but the thing that comes just before relief. The moment when someone who has been bracing for impact realizes the ground might actually hold. Then she set the page down and picked up her phone. I need to call Renata right now. It's not 7 yet. Renata bills $400 an hour and has told me explicitly to call any time I have something material. She was already dialing. This is material. She stood up from the table and walked to the living room window, and Noah heard her voice shift into its operational register, precise, fast, dense with information. He listened to enough of it to know she was in capable hands, and then went to make breakfast, because Sophie would be up in 30 minutes, and pancakes were on the agenda, and he was not going to let the edges burn this time if it killed him. He was standing at the stove with focused concentration when Sophie appeared. Is she on the phone again? She found something important last night. She's handling it. Sophie looked toward the living room. Is it going to be okay? I think it's going to be better than it was yesterday. Sophie considered this with the particular gravity she brought to serious topics. That's not the same as okay. No, but it's movement in the right direction. She climbed onto her chair and propped her chin in her hands, watching him work. After a moment, the edges aren't burning. I know. You're going slower. I'm concentrating. Maybe that's the secret. Just concentrate more. Thank you, Sophie. That's a very useful insight. I have lots of useful insights, she said without irony. Ms. Donovan says I should consider journalism. I believe it. Vivian came back into the kitchen as Noah was sliding the first batch onto plates. She looked at the pancakes, and then at Sophie, and then at Noah, with an expression that had something loosened in it. Something that the phone call had moved, or maybe the page 18, or maybe both. Renata is on her way, she said. She'll be here by 9. Good. Noah set a plate in front of Sophie. Eat first. I'm not hungry. Vivian. He set a second plate at her spot. Eat. She sat down, looked at the pancake, looked at Sophie, who was already eating with the focused efficiency of someone fueling up for a demanding day. The edges aren't burned, Sophie noted, chewing. I noticed, Vivian said. Dad concentrated more. It shows. Noah sat down with his own plate, and the three of them ate breakfast, and outside the morning was overcast, but dry, and inside the kitchen was warm, and for about 12 minutes nothing bad existed. Renata Vasquez arrived at 9:03 in a charcoal blazer and flat shoes, carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived a war, which Noah suspected it had in the figurative sense. She was in her early 50s, compact with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of focused attention that makes a room feel smaller when she enters it. Not threatening, just very precise. She shook Noah's hand with both of hers when Vivian introduced him. You're the contractor, Renata said. I am. The compliance records were your connection. Pete Chen's records. He was the site lead. I just knew they existed. Renata looked at him for a moment with something calibrating behind her eyes. Good instinct. Then she turned to Vivian, and the two of them moved to the kitchen table, and the briefcase came open, and that was effectively the last time Noah was part of that conversation. Hai gave them the kitchen. Went and sat with Sophie in the living room while she organized her rock collection on the coffee table for what she explained was a full inventory audit, explaining each specimen to Noah with the patience of a museum curator who has accepted that some visitors will require more context than others. He was listening with one ear, and with the other tracking the rhythm of the voices in the kitchen. Not the words, but the pace of them, the way they shifted from rapid and overlapping to quiet and concentrated and back. Around 10:30, Renata raised her voice enough that words carried through. If Cho's badge is in these records on April 9th, and the metadata on the fabricated documents shows a creation date in the April window, then we have a chain that a first-year associate could follow. Vivian's response was lower. Then Renata again. I'm not asking you to celebrate. I'm asking you to understand that we now have a story. Julian's story was that you did it. Our story is that he paid someone to make it look like you did it, and we have independent physical evidence placing him and his agent at the source. Those are two very different stories to put in front of a board. Another pause. Then Vivian quietly but clearly. He's going to say the records are falsified. He's going to go after the contractor. Let him. Third-party OSHA compliance records with a chain of custody to an independent filing office, corroborated by digital metadata analysis. He's welcome to try. Renata's voice was almost amused. Julian Mercer is a very sophisticated manipulator of institutional systems. He is not a construction compliance expert. Sophie looked up from her rock collection. The ladies in the kitchen sound serious. They are, Noah said. Is Vivian going to win? I think she is. Sophie returned to her inventory with visible satisfaction. Good, she should. He looked at his daughter. Why do you think so? Sophie held up a piece of feldspar and examined it in the light. Because she's the kind of person who built something real, and someone's trying to take it, and you don't get to take what someone built real. She looked at him over the rock. That's just wrong. It is, Noah said. You're absolutely right. Also, Sophie added, setting the feldspar down carefully. She listened to the whole soccer ball story yesterday. All of it. Most adults stop listening after the first part. Noah smiled. That's also a valid point, he said. He made lunch. Sandwiches simple, left them on the counter, and knocked on the kitchen door frame to let Vivian and Renata know they were there. Renata grabbed one without looking up from the documents. Vivian looked at Noah with an expression that was crowded with things she wasn't saying, and he nodded. Once you're okay, keep going, and left them to it. The afternoon moved slowly. Sophie went to read in her room after lunch. Noah sat at the dining room table with his own work, the Harmon Project file material specs. He needed to review measurements that needed to be cross-checked, doing the ordinary work of his ordinary job while in his kitchen. Vivian Cross was building a legal case that would determine the future of 460 people. He found he could not concentrate on the Harmon specs. He was honest with himself about why. It wasn't anxiety about the case, or worry about Julian Mercer, or even concern about Sophie being caught up in something. It was simpler and more inconvenient than any of those things. It was the specific discomfort of a person who has kept a door locked for a long time and can feel the lock changing from the inside without having chosen to touch it. He didn't chase the thought. He'd learned slowly the hard way over 3 years not to chase thoughts like that. You could spend a lot of energy chasing something that would either come to you or wouldn't, and the chasing never made it come faster. It only made you tired. He went back to the material specs. At 3:15, Renata came out of the kitchen. I have to go, she told Noah. I have a call with the board's general counsel at 4, and I need to be in my office for it. She picked up her briefcase. The records you sourced, the compliance logs, I'm going to need Pete Chen's contact information and a signed declaration that the records haven't been altered since he filed them. Pete will cooperate. I'll call him this afternoon. Good. She paused. You did something useful. More useful than you probably know. She said it cleanly without performance. Just information. It's Pete's work, Noah said. You knew the records existed. You knew where to look. She looked at him with the same calibrating attention from earlier. In my experience, most people don't know what they know until someone asks the right question. You asked yourself the right question. She left. Noah went to the kitchen. Vivian was sitting at the table with her hands in front of her, and the legal pad and her phone and Pete's compliance logs, all organized into neat stacks, and she was looking at nothing in particular with the expression of someone who has just run a very long distance and is only now understanding that their legs are tired. He sat down across from her. How did it go? Renata thinks we can go to the board before Julian does. Not wait for Friday, move first. Present our evidence request and emergency session, put Julian on defense instead of offense. She pressed her lips together. It's a risk. If we move first and the board doesn't respond the way we need them to, we've shown our hand, and Julian knows exactly what we have. What does Renata think the odds are? She said 60-40 in our favor if we move first, 50-50 if we wait. A pause. She also said that in 22 years of corporate law, she has never recommended waiting when the alternative was moving, because waiting is just choosing a worse version of the same moment. She sounds right. She's almost always right, which is what I pay her for, and also why she irritates me sometimes. Something in Vivian's voice was softer than it had been all morning. The operational precision was still there, but underneath it, or maybe around the edges of it, was the presence of an actual person who was very tired and very cautious about hoping. You're going to win this, Noah said. She looked at him. I'm not saying that to make you feel better, he said. I'm saying it because Julian built his case on assuming you wouldn't have access to certain information. He didn't account for the fact that 3 years ago, construction crews were active in his target building, logging every single person who walked through the restricted floors. He didn't account for OSHA compliance paperwork. He didn't account for... He stopped. For what? For you ending up somewhere he didn't expect with someone who spent 11 years on construction sites and knows exactly what gets written down and where it goes. Vivian was quiet for a moment. He thought he knew all my connections, she said slowly. He thought he had mapped everyone who mattered to me. That was the whole structure of what he built. He knew my world well enough to reach into it and pull out what he needed. She looked at Noah. He didn't know about you because I didn't know about you. Not really. You weren't in my world yet. You were just a contractor. Someone honest, she said. On the periphery. Someone I'd noticed but never... She shook her head. Julian never knew to look in that direction because I didn't know to look there either. Sometimes what protects you is exactly what you didn't think to protect, Noah said. She held his gaze. You should have been a philosopher, she said. I work in construction. I'm beginning to think those are not as different as people assume. The corner of her mouth moved. You spend a lot of time making sure things hold. He looked away before his face could do something he'd have to account for. The afternoon moved toward evening. Sophie came out of her room at 4 and immediately went to Vivian and showed her the completed inventory audit presented on a hand-drawn chart that listed every rock by name origin and what Sophie called emotional significance, which turned out to mean whether the rock reminded her of something important. Vivian studied the chart with the same seriousness she had given Renata's legal documents and asked 3 specific questions that made Sophie nearly levitate with satisfaction. The evening came. Dinner happened. Sophie's homework happened. The ordinary architecture of a weekday in a household with a child fell into place around everything else, and Vivian moved through it without awkwardness, now helping clear the table, asking Sophie about fractions homework in a way that made fractions approximately 30% less traumatic than usual. After Sophie went to bed, Noah made tea. They sat at the kitchen table again, which was becoming a pattern, and the house was quiet in its good way, and for a while, neither of them said anything that needed to be said. Then Vivian said, "Can I ask you about Claire?" He looked up. "You don't have to," she said immediately. I know that's... It's okay, he said. What do you want to know? She was careful with it. How did you keep going after? With Sophie, with everything. How did you just keep going? He thought about it for a moment. The real answer, not the one that sounded good. I didn't have a choice, he said. Sophie needed breakfast. That was it the first morning. She needed breakfast, and I was the one who could make it. So I made it. He turned the mug in his hands. And then she needed a lunch packed. And then she needed someone to pick her up. And then she needed help with a school project. And then she needed someone to sit with her during a thunderstorm because she was scared. He paused. Grief doesn't go away because you keep moving. But it changes shape when you keep moving. The whole room to being... He thought about it. A corner of the room. It's still there. But there's more room now. Vivian was looking at him. I spent a year after the engagement ended, she said quietly, not knowing who I was without the threat of Julian. Not the relationship, the threat. He had become so much of my architecture that when he was gone, I didn't know what was load-bearing and what wasn't. She paused. I kept making decisions and not trusting them. Kept having opinions and second-guessing them. Kept waking up at 3 in the morning running through conversations, editing things I'd said, wondering whether my first instinct or my second instinct was actually mine. Is it getting better? I'm here, aren't I? She looked around the kitchen, his cracked clock, his daughter's purple marker Wi-Fi password on the refrigerator, the lantern still on the counter from the first night. I didn't dissolve. I found something close to the truth. I called you when I needed somewhere to be. A pause. 6 months ago, I would not have been able to do that. Progress, he said. Very slow progress. Still counts. She looked at him with that particular expression, the one that was open in a way she hadn't decided to be, the way a door is open, because the wind moved it, rather than because someone chose to turn the knob. I used to think trust was something you built with people over time, she said. That's what Julian always said. Real trust takes years. He said it early when I was still holding back, and it felt wise, and I leaned into it. And what I didn't understand until much later was that he was using it as a reason for me to keep investing, keep extending, keep giving him more access, more information, more trust. Because we'd been doing this for so long, it would be a waste to stop now. She shook her head. He weaponized my own patience against me. That's the cruelest version of that, Noah said. It is. She held the mug with both hands. And yet sitting here in this house which I've been in for 2 days with a man I've spoken to fewer than 10 times total, I trust you more than I trusted him after 2 years. She looked up. What does that tell you? He was quiet for a moment. It tells me you know the difference, he said. You always knew. You just had someone working very hard to convince you that you didn't. She set down the mug. For a moment the kitchen was very still. Then her phone lit up on the table between them. She glanced at it, and her face shifted. The openness pulled back not into coldness, but into focus. She picked it up. It's Daniel Cho, she said. Noah went still. He's asking to meet, tonight. She read the screen lips pressed together. He says he has something to tell me. He says he's sorry. Don't go. I'm not going anywhere. She turned the phone so he could see the message. He says he'll come to wherever I am. He says Julian told him it was a consulting arrangement. He says he didn't know what he was giving Julian access to until he saw what was being done with it. That could be true, Noah said. Or it could be Julian trying to find out where you are. I know. She was very still. But if Cho is genuinely trying to cooperate, then he cooperates with Renata, not you, not here. She looked at him. I'm not telling you what to do, Noah said. This is your company and your situation. You're protecting me. I'm stating a concern. That's the same thing. Is it? She looked at the phone for a moment longer. Then she typed a reply, concise 3 lines which she showed him before sending. She told Cho that she was represented by counsel and that any communication should go through Renata Vasquez. She included Renata's contact information. She did not acknowledge where she was or that she had read the message quickly or anything that gave information away. She set the phone down. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. I'm forwarding the message to Renata. Good. She forwarded it, set the phone face down on the table, and then looked at Noah with something in her face that was complicated and clear at the same time, like the way water can be both things. This is almost over, she said. The crisis part. One way or another after Thursday, I'll know what's left. She paused. I'm going to have to go back. I know. To my life, my penthouse, my office. Something in the words had a weight she was acknowledging without dramatizing. Which I want. I want my company back, and my life back, and my own. She stopped. I just want you to know that I know what this is, what you've done here, and I'm not going to... She seemed to search for the word. I'm not going to pretend it was nothing when it's over, the way people do. I know you won't, Noah said. How do you know? Because you're not a person who pretends things are nothing, he said. You're a person who decided it was safer to feel less for a while. That's different. She looked at the table. I feel a lot, actually, she said quietly. I always have. Julian called it my weakness. She paused. He was wrong about most things, but he was especially wrong about that. Noah looked at her across the table. This woman in his blue shirt with her legal pads, and her compliance records, and her 460 employees, and her geologically informed friendship with his 7-year-old daughter, and felt something settle in him that had been restless for a long time. He didn't say what he was thinking. It wasn't the right moment. Too many things were still unresolved, and he was not going to add pressure to a person who had been fighting pressure for years. But he felt it. Get some sleep, he said. Thursday is going to need you at full capacity. She stood up, gathered her legal pad and phone and the stacked pages of Pete's compliance records. At the doorway to the hallway, she stopped and turned back. Noah. Yeah. The pancakes this morning with the edges that weren't burned. She paused. They were actually really good. He looked at her. Don't tell Sophie, he said. It'll go to her head. Something in her face came alive, that involuntary thing, the laugh that escaped before she decided to let it, and she went down the hallway, and the door to his bedroom clicked shut. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. Tomorrow, Renata would call the board's general counsel. Tomorrow, Daniel Cho would either become a cooperating witness or reveal himself as Julian's last play. Tomorrow, the shape of Thursday would start to become visible. But right now, the house was quiet and whole, and Pete's compliance records were in a stack on the kitchen table with Julian Mercer's name on page 18, and the clock on the stove still had a cracked frame, and Vivian Cross was sleeping safely in his bedroom. And Noah Bennett, who had learned to live inside loss, felt something that was not loss at all. Beginning to take up space in the corner of the room that grief had slowly been vacating. He didn't rush it. He just let it be there. That was enough for tonight. That was more than enough. Daniel Cho called Renata at 7:45 Wednesday morning. Noah knew because Vivian's phone lit up on the kitchen table at 7:46 with a text from Renata that said simply, "He's talking. Call me when you can." He knew because Vivian was already awake and dressed. Actually dressed in clothes. Renata had brought over in a bag yesterday, along with her own briefcase, a tailored gray blouse and dark slacks, the CEO clothes, the armor going back on, and she read the message and went very still for exactly 2 seconds before she picked up the phone and called. Noah gave her the kitchen, went to get Sophie up for school. Sophie was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, explaining something to Gerald with great seriousness. She looked up when Noah came in. "I heard Vivian's voice," she said. "She's up early. Something important happened. She's handling it." "Is it almost over?" He sat on the edge of her bed. "I think so. One way or another after tomorrow things will change." Sophie looked at Gerald, then at her father. "When things change, does she go back to her other life?" "Probably. But we can still see her, right? She can still come for Sunday breakfast." Noah looked at his daughter. 7 years old, pajamas, holding a stuffed elephant with a scarred trunk, asking the question that he had been turning over in his own chest for 2 days without letting himself look at it directly. "I don't know, Soph," he said. "That's her decision to make." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this with her characteristic gravity. Then, "I think she'll come back. She looks at you like she's trying to memorize things." Noah stood up before his face could respond to that. "Get dressed. Breakfast in 15. Are the edges going to be burned?" "Not if you stop distracting me. I made the pancakes. Did not burn the edges." Vivian came back into the kitchen while Sophie was eating, and something in her face had shifted. Not relaxed exactly, but restructured the way a building looks different when you change what's holding it up. "Cho is cooperating," she said. She sat down, picked up her coffee. "Julian approached him 14 months ago, told him he was going to be frozen out of the company restructuring, that I was planning to replace the entire infrastructure leadership team after the merger talks concluded. That his career at Crosswell was already over, and Julian was offering him a way to land somewhere soft." She paused. "None of it was true. I had no such plans. But Cho didn't know that, and Julian made it feel credible enough, and so he—" She stopped. "He opened the door," Noah said. He walked Julian through it, gave him physical access to the server room, then used his own credentials to pull the documents Julian needed. He said he thought he was helping Julian prepare a legitimate case against me for the board. That Julian had told him there was real misconduct, and he was just gathering evidence. The word came out with a very specific edge. He said he didn't know the documents would be altered. "Do you believe him?" She considered this with her eyes on the table. "I believe he's scared enough to be telling the truth right now, whether that means he's innocent of the full scheme." She shook her head slightly. "I'll leave that to Renata." "What does it mean for your case?" "It means we have a witness, a cooperating insider who can describe Julian's approach, his methodology, the specific instructions he gave." She lifted her eyes. "It means Julian's manufactured evidence doesn't just have holes in it. It has a person standing next to it explaining exactly which tools were used to manufacture it. Sophie had been following this conversation with the focused attention she usually reserved for geological taxonomy. Is the bad man going to get in trouble? Vivian looked at her. Yes, I think he is. Good. Sophie returned to her pancake. The edges really aren't burned today, Dad. I know, Sophie. Consistent improvement. Eat your breakfast. He drove Sophie to school. She hugged him tighter than usual. She did that when she sensed something was tipping, when the balance of things was about to shift, and she wanted to anchor herself to what she knew. He held on until she let go first. It's going to be okay, she said to him, which was the same thing he always said to her, delivered in the same tone, matter-of-fact and certain. He watched her run through the gate, drove home. The house felt different when he walked back in, charged in a way it hadn't been the previous 2 days, the way air feels before a front moves through. Vivian was on a call with Renata. He could hear both sides this time because Vivian had put it on speaker standing at the kitchen counter with both hands flat on the surface leaning in. Renata's voice. I've contacted the board chair, Sandra Park. She knows Vivian. She's been on this board for 6 years, and she is not someone Julian has managed to reach. I've requested an emergency session for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I told her we have documentary evidence relevant to the matter Julian has been preparing to bring, and that it is in the board's interest to hear it before they receive anything from Julian's attorneys. Did she agree? She's calling me back within the hour. But Sandra Park doesn't delay things without reason, and she doesn't give Julian Mercer the benefit of the doubt. She never liked him, which she was professional enough not to say, and obvious enough that everyone noticed anyway. A beat. We're in a good position, Vivian. I want you to hear that. I'll hear it when it's over. Fair. But I'm saying it now so that when it is over, you remember I said it first. Vivian almost smiled. You'll invoice me for that, won't you? I invoice you for everything. It's why you trust me. Renata's voice shifted. One more thing. Julian's attorneys sent a letter to the board this morning. Overnight delivery, which means he was planning to move up his timeline regardless. He's going to try to get in front of Sandra before I do. Can he? He can try. But I've been doing this longer than his attorneys have been practicing law collectively, and I am not going to let a man in a good suit with manufactured documents beat me to a board chair who I've worked with for 11 years. Pure confidence. Not performed the real kind, the kind that comes from having been right enough times that you don't need to announce it. Let me work. You prepare. The call ended. Vivian stood at the counter for a moment without moving. Then she turned around, and Noah was there, and she looked at him with something raw at the edges. Not fear, but the specific exposure of someone standing at the edge of the thing they've been working toward, finally close enough to see both how far they've come and how much there still is to lose. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. I need to be ready. You are ready. I need to... She moved to the table, picked up the legal pad, put it down again. I need to go over everything. The access logs. Cho's statement. The metadata analysis from our forensic tech. The sequence of... She stopped. She was doing the thing, the spinning, the compulsive reviewing, the running of scenarios that achieves nothing except the illusion of control. He recognized it because he'd done versions of it for months after Claire died, running through the last morning, the last conversation, the last ordinary moment, as if reviewing it enough times could change its outcome. Vivian. She looked at him. You've done the work. The records are solid. Renata has them. Cho is cooperating. The forensic analysis is complete. He kept his voice level. Reviewing it again right now doesn't add anything. It just cost you energy you need for tomorrow. I know that. And yet, she said. She set the legal pad down, pressed her hands flat on it. I've been running on adrenaline for 3 days, Noah. When it slows down, I don't know what to do with myself. I've been like this since I've been like this for a long time. Since before Julian. Since before Julian. A pause. Since always maybe. The company was mine by the time I was 24. I had investors by 25. By 26, I had 80 employees and a board and a growth rate that everyone kept describing as unprecedented, and I was so terrified of the whole thing collapsing that I never stopped moving. If I stopped moving, I had to sit with the possibility that it could all— She stopped. Fall, she confirmed. And then Julian came along and he seemed like stability, like someone who could stand still beside me while everything else moved. And what I didn't understand until much later was that what he was actually doing was standing between me and everything that might have held me up on its own. Noah was quiet. Then, "You want to know what I think?" She looked at him. "I always want to know what you think. That's been the problem from the beginning." Something about the way she said it. Not the words, but the evenness of them, the directness, the acknowledgement of what it was, landed somewhere specific in his chest. He sat down at the table. "I think you were already standing," he said. "Before Julian, during Julian, and now. I think the company didn't grow because of the momentum it grew because of you and your judgment, and the fact that you went into that construction site and got an honest answer from a contractor and actually adjusted based on it, which most people with your level of authority don't do." He paused. "Julian didn't give you stability. He gave you the feeling of stability while quietly removing everything that would have given you the real thing." She was very still. "The difference," he continued, "between what he offered and what you actually have right now is that everything you have right now is real. Renata is real. The compliance records are real. Cho's testimony is real. Sandra Park not liking. Julian is very real." He paused. "Sophie wanting you to come to Sunday breakfast is real." The last one did something to her face. "Noah, I'm not saying it to—" He stopped himself, chose the words carefully. "I'm not saying it to complicate tomorrow. I'm saying it because you asked me once why I trust myself on construction sites. And the answer is that I've seen enough things fall that I know what actually holds and what just looks like it holds. And you—" He let the sentence find its own end. "You hold." Vivian Cross, CEO of Crosswell Technologies, sat at the kitchen table of a modest house in a regular neighborhood and looked at a widowed single father who fixed things for a living, and her jaw tightened, and she pressed her lips together, and she looked away to the window, the way she always did when something hit somewhere she hadn't fortified. Then she looked back. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay. I'll stop reviewing the files." A breath. "I'll trust that the work is done." "Good. I'm not promising to stop thinking about it entirely." "I wouldn't believe you if you did." The corner of her mouth. That involuntary thing. They sat there for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have said something true and are letting it be true without adding anything on top of it. Then Renata called back. Sandra Park had agreed to the 9 a.m. session. Everything from that point moved fast. Renata arrived at 2 with 2 associates and an air of controlled urgency that reorganized the kitchen into something resembling a field command center. Documents came out. The forensic tech's report appeared 30 pages that Vivian read in 40 minutes and annotated in red pen. Cho's recorded statement was played twice. The compliance records were checked against the metadata analysis line by line. Noah made coffee, kept it coming, stayed out of the way, except when Renata looked at him directly to confirm a technical detail about the Henderson site, which happened 3 times, and each time he gave clear and specific answers without editorializing, and each time Renata made a note. At 5 o'clock, Renata sat back in her chair and looked at Vivian. "We're ready." "You're sure?" "I'm sure we're as ready as the evidence allows us to be. I'm sure the story we're telling is true, which is the most important thing, because true stories don't develop internal contradictions under pressure and false ones do." She gathered the documents. "Julian is going to come in tomorrow with a performance. We're coming in with facts. In my experience, facts are boring but durable." Vivian nodded. "Get some rest," Renata said. 9 a.m. I'll be there before 8 to set up." She paused at the door and looked at Noah. "Thank you for all of this." She said it simply without decoration. "Pete Chen did the work," Noah said. "Pete Chen filed papers. You knew they existed. There's a meaningful difference." She left. The house settled back into itself after Renata and her associates were gone. Sophie came home from the neighbors where she'd spent the afternoon full of news about a disagreement over a board game that bore striking structural similarities to the soccer ball incident, which she presented to Vivian as a comparison study. Vivian engaged with it with full seriousness, identified the common pattern centralized authority without buy-in from affected parties, and Sophie absorbed this formulation with the expression of someone receiving genuinely useful intelligence. Dinner was quiet. Not uncomfortable. A different kind of quiet. The purposeful quiet of the night before, something the way a house sounds when everyone in it is aware of the morning. After Sophie was in bed, Noah and Vivian sat on the back porch. Not by arrangement, he'd gone out for air, and she'd followed a few minutes later. It was cold, but dry, and the neighborhood was still, except for the occasional car passing the front of the house. For a while, neither of them said anything. "I keep thinking about what I'm going to say tomorrow," Vivian said. "In the room, when it's my turn." "What are you thinking?" "That I want to tell the truth, the whole truth, not just the part that proves Julian manufactured evidence. That part is what the documents say. But the other part." She paused. "That I was afraid. That I made decisions from a place of fear and isolation that I should have made from a place of clear judgment. That I let someone into the architecture of my company and my life who had no business being there, and that it cost people I'm responsible for." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to stand up in that room and just be a victim of Julian's scheme. I want to be accountable for my part of it." "That's going to be harder than presenting the documents," Noah said. "I know. And braver." "I don't know if it's brave. It might just be—" She searched. "Necessary. To be able to live with myself after. Those aren't mutually exclusive." She looked out at the dark. "Julian is going to be in that room. He'll have legal representation, and he'll have whatever board allies he's cultivated, and he'll have that particular energy of his, that complete certainty that he's already won that comfortable confidence that comes from having never once been seriously challenged." A pause. "He looked at me at the gala like I was already finished. Like I was something he was just taking his time with." What did that feel like? Cold. She said it immediately without having to think. Not scared. Cold. Like something in me went very quiet and very clear. She turned to look at Noah. "I think that's when I knew I wasn't going to give him what he wanted. I didn't know how yet, but I knew." "That's the thing about being pushed all the way to the edge," Noah said. "You find out what you're made of." "What am I made of?" She asked it without irony, genuinely. He looked at her in the dark, and he didn't look away. This time, didn't redirect, didn't find something in the middle distance to focus on instead. "Granite," he said. "About a 6 to 7 on the Mohs scale." Something broke open in her face. She laughed, real this time, full surprised, and the sound of it went out into the dark neighborhood and disappeared. And for a moment, she looked exactly like the person she had been before anyone spent years convincing her to be something smaller. Then she went quiet again, but it was a good quiet, a rested quiet. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to just let me say it without you doing the thing you do, where you redirect it back to practicality." He waited. "I have been in this house for 3 days," she said. "And in 3 days I have slept more than I have in the preceding 8 months. I have laughed more than I have in longer than that. I have eaten pancakes with a 7-year-old who knows what schist is. And I have felt for the first time in a very long time like I exist inside my own life instead of managing it from the outside." She paused. "That's because of you. Not the room or the Wi-Fi or the logistical safety of Julian not knowing your address. You specifically." Noah was very still. I'm not offering you anything, and I'm not asking you for anything," she said carefully. "I'm saying it because you deserve to hear it, and because I've spent a long time in a relationship where the truth was currency, and I refuse to do that anymore." She looked at him. "You are one of the most genuinely good people I have ever encountered. And I think you've been holding yourself in that grief long enough that you've started to confuse the carrying of it with the being of you." His jaw tightened. "Claire made you who you are," Vivian said. "The way you love Sophie, The way you treated me from the first minute without pity or agenda. The way you talked to Frank about the framework for 20 minutes, like it mattered. Claire is in all of that. You carry her by being that person. A pause. But I don't think she would want the being of you to stop there. The yard was very still. Something in Noah's chest moved that hadn't moved in a long time. Not breaking, not the sharp grief he'd learned to manage, but something older and quieter than that. Something unlocking. He didn't trust his voice immediately, so he waited until he did. 3 years, he said finally. I keep thinking it's been 3 years and I should have... He stopped. Sophie told me once that Gerald's scar means he's been through stuff. She said it like it was a good thing, like it was just information. He paused. I haven't figured out how to apply that to myself. Gerald also keeps showing up, Vivian said. Every morning, scar and all. He looked at her. I know, he said. The back door opened. Sophie stood in it, squinting against the porch light, Gerald under one arm. I couldn't sleep, she announced. Gerald is worried about tomorrow. Gerald doesn't know about tomorrow, Noah said. Gerald knows everything. He just doesn't say it. She looked at Vivian. Are you worried? A little, Vivian said. That's okay. My dad says a little worried means you care about the right things. She looked between them with the particular expression of a child who has interrupted something she doesn't fully understand, but senses was important. Sorry, I'll go back to bed. Sophie. Vivian's voice was soft. Thank you. For everything this week. Sophie considered this with her full attention. You listened to the whole soccer ball story, she said. That means a lot. She went back inside. Noah and Vivian sat in the quiet she left behind. Tomorrow, Noah said. Tomorrow, she agreed. They didn't say the rest of it. There was a rest of it. They both knew there was a rest of it. Something that had been building in the ordinary space of shared breakfasts and compliance records and back porch conversations, something real enough that neither of them needed to name it to be aware of it. But tomorrow was the thing that had to come first. So he let it be first. They went inside. He went to the couch. She went to his bedroom. And in the house that had been just his and Sophie's, in the space between whatever this was and whatever it would become. The night passed quietly, and the clock on the stove with the cracked frame read 12:04, then 1:17, then 3:49, the hours moving in that particular slow way of hours that matter. At 4:30, Noah stopped pretending to sleep and went to the kitchen and sat with a cup of coffee in the dark, thinking about granite and scars, and a compliance log with a name on page 18, and the specific irreversible feeling of a door that has swung open past the point where you could close it again without effort. He didn't try to close it. He sat with his coffee and let the morning come. And at 8:15, when Vivian came out of the bedroom in the clothes Renata had brought, blazer, dark slacks, heels, her hair pulled back, the full professional armor, she looked like the CEO of a $2 billion company. She looked like the woman on the covers of Forbes. She looked like someone who could walk into a board meeting and dismantle whatever Julian Mercer had spent 2 years constructing. But she also looked, when she stopped in the kitchen doorway and found Noah there, like the person who had knocked on his door in the storm. Both things were true. Both things were her. She picked up the travel mug of coffee he'd already poured for her and said, "How do I look?" He looked at her steadily. "Like someone who's going to win," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she lifted the mug, once a small gesture, a toast, an acknowledgement, and walked to the front door. He followed her out to where Renata's car was already waiting. She turned at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him. He was 3 steps above her, which made them almost even. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "I want you to know something." He waited. "I came here because I trusted you." She said it simply, without adornment. "I'm leaving because I trust myself again. Those two things are connected." I didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and she looked at him, and between them was everything that was true, and everything that was still becoming true, and neither of them needed to attach words to it right now to know it was real. She turned and walked to the car. He stood on the porch and watched until the car disappeared around the corner. Then he went inside, called Sophie's school to let them know she'd be in late this morning, and sat down at the kitchen table. He turned to page 18. He looked at the name. Julian Mercer. Guest. Escorted. The beginning of the end of his own plan, written in standardized contractor compliance format on a Tuesday in April in a building. Noah had worked in for 2 weeks and never thought about again. He folded the page carefully, put it in his jacket pocket, and waited to find out what the truth was worth. The call came at 11:47. Noah had dropped Sophie at school late, come home done. 2 loads of laundry, reviewed the Harmon project specs twice, without retaining anything made, and abandoned a cup of coffee, and was standing at the kitchen sink, staring at the backyard, when his phone buzzed on the counter. Renata's number. He picked up. "It's done," Renata said. He didn't speak. He waited. Julian's attorneys presented first. Sandra Park let them finish without interruption, which I've learned over the years means she's already decided something and is waiting to confirm it. A pause. Then we went. The compliance records, the metadata analysis chose statement. I walked the board through the full sequence, how Julian identified the vulnerability. Recruited Cho obtained physical access, directed the document alteration, and then used the manufactured evidence as leverage for a forced transfer of voting control. Another pause shorter. Julian tried to interrupt twice. Sandra Park stopped him both times. By the 3rd time he tried, she didn't even look at him. Noah exhaled slowly. Vivian. She was extraordinary. Renata said it the way she said everything, cleanly without decoration, which made it mean more. She presented the documented case, and then she did something I didn't advise her to do, and that I'm now prepared to admit was exactly correct. She told them the truth. A beat of silence. You knew she was going to do that. I thought she might. She told the board that she had made decisions from a compromised position, that she had allowed someone into the operational structure of the company who had no business being there, and that her judgment during that period had been affected in ways she was still working to fully understand. She took accountability, not for Julian's actions, but for her own. Renata's voice had something in it that $400 an hour usually didn't buy. There are board members who have known Vivian for 6 years and have never once heard her say she was wrong about anything. Not because she's arrogant. She's not arrogant, she's careful. But because she's always had to be twice as right as everyone else in the room to be taken half as seriously. A pause. Today, she stood up in front of all of them and said she was human and fallible, and still the right person to run this company. And they believed her. Because it was true. Noah sat down at the kitchen table. What happened to Julian? The board suspended his board observer privileges effective immediately and referred the matter to their general counsel for coordination with law enforcement. Cho's statement constitutes evidence of criminal conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Julian's attorneys went very quiet after that. A brief pause. Julian himself, he sat there, through all of it. That particular look men like him get when the ground shifts and they haven't processed it yet. Like they're still waiting for the reality to correct itself back to the version they expected. It won't. No, it won't. Renata cleared her throat. Vivian is going to be in debrief for another hour or so, but she wanted you to know as soon as the session closed. Thank you, Renata. Thank Pete Chen, she said. And thank whoever taught you that construction compliance records are worth knowing about. She hung up. Noah set the phone down on the kitchen table, next to the folded copy of page 18 that he'd put in his jacket that morning and taken back out when he sat down. He looked at the page. Julian Mercer's name. Tuesday in April. A moment of carelessness that became the thread that unraveled everything. He thought about what Vivian had said on the back porch, that she had come here trusting him and was leaving trusting herself again, and that those two things were connected. He thought about the cracked clock on the stove which still needed replacing. He thought about Claire, which he did every day, but differently than he used to, not with the desperate reaching quality of early grief. Not the clawing need to hold on to details before they faded. More like acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge something that is permanently and peacefully part of you. Moving forward doesn't erase the past, someone had said to him recently. It honors the love that taught you how to care deeply. He hadn't told Vivian that Claire used to say something almost exactly like that. He thought maybe he would someday. He folded page 18 back along its crease and put it in the kitchen drawer, where he kept the things that mattered but didn't need to be looked at every day. Then he got up, got his jacket, and went to pick up his daughter. Sophie took the news with the measured satisfaction of someone whose prediction has been confirmed. "I told you she'd win," she said from the back seat. "You did." Gerald also thought she'd win, but Gerald thinks positive things generally. I try to be more realistic, and I still thought she'd win, which I think says more. It says a great deal, Soph. Can we have a celebration breakfast on Sunday? I think that's a very good idea. Will she come? He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. I don't know yet. That's her choice. Sophie accepted this. She looked out the window at the passing street, one hand resting on Gerald's head with the absent-minded tenderness of long habit. Dad, do you like her? Like her? Noah kept his eyes on the road. That's a complicated question. It's actually a pretty simple question. You're making it complicated. Sophie, I'm just saying, she looks at you like you're granite. A pause. That's the highest thing I can say about someone. He did not have an answer for that was appropriate for a 7-year-old. So he said nothing, and Sophie seemed to accept this as confirmation enough, and they drove the rest of the way home in a comfortable silence that was as usual mostly comfortable because Sophie was temporarily satisfied, and not because Noah's thoughts were anything close to quiet. Vivian didn't come back to the house that evening. She texted at 4:30 board session over. Going to office for debrief with senior team. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for everything. And then at 5:15, Renata told me she called you. I'm glad you knew before I could tell you myself. That felt right. He texted back. It did. Congratulations, Vivian. And then after a moment added, Sophie wants a celebration breakfast Sunday. 3 minutes passed. Then tell her I'll bring the orange juice. He read that twice. Then he showed it to Sophie, who pumped her fist with a velocity that startled Gerald off the couch. The week that followed was ordinary. In all the ways, Noah's life was ordinary, which he had learned to be grateful for rather than numb to. Work. Sophie's school. The Harmon Project moving into its next phase. Ray asking no question about the strange week, but giving Noah the same shoulder touch he'd given him 3 years ago, after the hard school pickup, which communicated everything that needed communicating. Vivian texted occasionally. Not constantly, not in the anxious contact-seeking way of someone who needed reassurance, but in the natural way of someone maintaining a genuine connection while managing a genuinely demanding situation. She was working 16-hour days. The board had formalized the referral to law enforcement, and Julian's attorneys were in active negotiation over the terms of his exit from any board-adjacent role. Daniel Cho had resigned and was cooperating fully. The senior team at Crosswell, who had operated for 3 days under a low-level collective anxiety that nobody had officially acknowledged, exhaled as a unit when Vivian walked back into the building and didn't walk like someone who expected to be stopped. She told Noah all of this in pieces in texts and 2 phone calls, and he received it the way he received most things directly, without editorializing with questions when he had them, and without when he didn't. On Friday evening she called instead of texting. How's Sophie? Told 3 people at school that a CEO won a corporate battle because of a rock collection. The logic is unclear to me, but apparently very clear to her. A real laugh on the other end, the full one. She's not entirely wrong. She would be devastated to know you said that in the best possible way. How are you? Fine, he said. And then because she'd called him out on that word before in an indirect way, he amended it. Good, genuinely good. Work is busy. Sophie found a piece of obsidian in the backyard that she's treating like a discovery of national significance. Obsidian is volcanic glass, formed when lava cools rapidly. It's genuinely interesting. Ancient cultures used it for cutting tools because the edge is sharper than surgical steel. Please do not tell Sophie that. She will attempt to perform surgery on Gerald. Another laugh, then quiet. I went back to my apartment Wednesday evening, she said. First time since the gala. How was it? A pause. Strange, quiet in the wrong way. Too much space. It's a large apartment. She was choosing words with care. I've always liked it. I designed it myself, worked with an architect, chose everything. It's exactly what I wanted when I moved in. Another pause. It felt like a place I used to live. He didn't respond to that directly, because the direct response to that was something he wasn't ready to say on the phone at the end of a week without being able to see her face. You've been through something significant, he said instead. Spaces take time to feel like yours again. That's normal. I know. She accepted the redirection without comment. I have a therapist. I start Monday. Renata's been telling me to for 2 years. Good. She's supposed to be very good. Specializes in, Renata said, high-functioning people who've learned to mistake control for stability, which I thought was either extremely accurate or extremely insulting. Probably both. Probably. A quiet beat. Noah. Yeah. Sunday. Can I still come? Sophie already has orange juice on the grocery list. I meant, is it still? She stopped. Tried again. I don't want to assume that because you offered refuge in a crisis, you want... Vivian. She stopped. Come to breakfast, he said. 9 o'clock. I'll concentrate on the pancakes. The Sunday morning she showed up. It was November, properly cold, and she knocked on the front door instead of appearing in crisis at 2 in the morning, which felt like an important distinction. She was in jeans and a soft sweater, and her hair was down, and she was carrying a container of orange juice and a small paper bag that turned out to contain a piece of dark gray stone wrapped in tissue paper. Sophie opened the door before Noah could get there, assessed the orange juice in the paper bag and said, Is that for me? It's obsidian, Vivian said. Volcanic glass, sharp enough historically to make surgical tools. Sophie's eyes went wide. She looked at Noah over Vivian's shoulder with an expression of pure vindication. I found obsidian in the backyard, Sophie said very carefully, as if the information might startle someone. I know, your dad told me. I thought yours deserved company. Vivian held out the paper bag. This one came from an actual volcanic site, Oregon. Sophie took the bag with the reverence of someone receiving something genuinely sacred. Then she looked up at Vivian. Come see my collection. I reorganized it. Sophie, Noah started. It's okay, Vivian said. I want to. She meant it. He could tell she meant it. Which was the thing about Vivian and Sophie. There was nothing performed in it. No adult tolerating child energy. Just genuine interest. Meeting, genuine enthusiasm. And the result was that Sophie had found in Vivian something she recognized instinctively as real. Hai made the pancakes, did not burn the edges. He could hear Sophie's voice from down the hallway, comprehensive and confident, explaining the new organizational system of the collection, and he could hear Vivian asking questions. Real questions, the specific kind, and the back and forth of it, filled the house the way sound fills a room that has been empty for too long and makes you realize only in the contrast how quiet it had been. He set the table. 3 places. The way it hadn't been set in 3 years without it feeling like an intrusion on a space that belonged to 2. This didn't feel like an intrusion. He wasn't sure what to do with that, except let it be true. They came back to the kitchen, Sophie still talking, Vivian listening, and they sat down, and Noah poured coffee, and Sophie poured orange juice, and the pancakes were good, and nobody mentioned the edges. After Sophie disappeared to her room to formally add the Oregon obsidian to the collection with appropriate documentation. She kept records naturally in a notebook, location and acquisition date, and relevant geological facts. Noah and Vivian sat at the table with their coffee and the Sunday quiet of the house around them. How are you sleeping? He asked. Better than I was, not as well as I did here. She held the mug. The therapist is good. I had 2 sessions. She said something in the first one that I've been thinking about all week. What did she say? She said that what Julian did was teach me that my own perceptions were unreliable. That's the mechanism. You don't control someone by telling them what to do. You control them by making them distrust their own reading of the world. And then they have to come to you for the correct interpretation. She paused. She said rebuilding trust in my own perceptions is going to be the actual work. Not processing what Julian did, processing the fact that I stopped trusting myself and learning how to start again. That's good work, Noah said. It's uncomfortable work. The best kind usually is. She looked at him. You've been doing some version of that too, since Claire. Yeah. How far along are you? He thought about it honestly, the way she had given him room to be honest from the beginning, without requiring polish. Far enough that I can feel the difference between carrying grief and hiding behind it, he said. Still learning which one I'm doing on any given day. She nodded slowly. That's further along than you give yourself credit for. Maybe. She set the mug down. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. He put his coffee down, gave her his full attention. I spent 3 days in this house, she said, and in those 3 days, I was more myself than I've been in 4 years. Not because the crisis was resolved, it wasn't resolved yet when I was here, but because you gave me a space where I didn't have to manage how I appeared, where I could be scared and not be punished for it, where a 7-year-old handed me a stuffed elephant and asked if I was okay, and it was just true care. No conditions. She held his gaze. I've been thinking about what that means. What it means that a stranger's kitchen table gave me more safety than my own apartment. And the therapist and I have talked about this, and she says the answer is that safety isn't a location, it's a quality of relationship. And she's right. But I want to be specific with you because you deserve specific. He waited. You are the quality I was describing, Vivian said. Not the house. You. The way you let me be in crisis without turning it into something you needed from me. The way you handed me towels and made tea and didn't ask me to explain myself to earn the basic kindness. The way you told me the truth about the load-bearing wall when everyone else was telling me what I wanted to hear, and the way you told me the truth about every other thing since. She paused. I am not saying this because I was vulnerable and you were kind and I'm confusing proximity for something else. I've thought about that very carefully and I am clear that I'm not confusing anything. Another pause. I'm saying this because I spent a long time with someone who made me feel like my perception was broken, and one of the things I'm working to reclaim is the ability to name what I actually know, and I know this. The kitchen was very still. Noah looked at her for a long moment. Then, I want to say something back, and I need you to let me find the words because I don't... He stopped. Tried again. I'm not good at this. I was good at it once with Claire, and then I spent 3 years not needing to be, and now... Take your time, she said quietly. He looked at his hands, then at her. I've been telling myself since Monday morning that what I was feeling was just circumstantial, that you were in a difficult situation, and I was the person who happened to be nearby, and the feelings were real, but they were also... He paused. Circumstantial feelings can be real and still not be the right thing to act on. I've been trying to figure out which kind these were. And you just knocked on my door on a Sunday morning with orange juice and a piece of volcanic glass for a 7-year-old's rock collection, he said. The crisis is over. Julian is dealt with. You have your company and your apartment and your life back. You didn't have to come here today. No, she said. I didn't. But you did. I did. He looked at her steadily. Then I think these aren't circumstantial feelings. Something in her face opened in the way it did when the truth arrived before she'd fully prepared for it. Not unprepared, just arrived. I'm not the same person I was before Julian, she said. I want you to know that going in. I'm working on things. There are going to be days when I default back to the walls and the control and the managing of how I appear, because that's been my survival mechanism for a long time, and it doesn't just stop because I want it to. I know, Noah said. I'm not the same person I was before Claire. There are going to be days when the grief takes up more room than I planned for, when I pull back because loving someone feels like something I'm not sure I'm allowed to do again. We're both somewhat broken, she said. We're both somewhat scarred, he said. There's a difference. He glanced toward the hallway where Gerald lived. Sophie's definition. The corner of her mouth moved. I don't want to be rescued, Vivian said. I want to be very clear about that. I don't need you to fix what Julian broke. I'm doing that with my therapist and my own work and time. What I'm saying... She stopped. Found it. What I'm saying is that I would like to build something, slowly, without pressure and without a timeline, something where neither of us disappears for the other to feel secure. Equals, he said. Equals, she confirmed. You don't become my project and I don't become your cause. And I'll never be your employee, your refuge, or your kept secret. You were never any of those things. She looked at him. You were always just you, exactly as you are. Slightly better at pancakes than previously advertised, he said. She laughed, the full one, and Noah Bennett, who had been holding a door closed for 3 years, because walking through it felt like a betrayal of what he'd lost. Felt the lock release all the way, not with a bang, not dramatically, but the way locks release when the right key turns them quietly and completely, and the door swings open to show you that there was never anything wrong with what was on the other side. The day moved around them. Sophie returning from her room with the fully updated collection inventory, demanding that Vivian sign it as an official geological witness, which Vivian did with great seriousness in the designated space. Sophie had helpfully labeled expert signature here. The orange juice ran out. Noah made more coffee. Sophie explained the entire provenance of 3 separate rocks to Vivian, who listened to all of it, and then offered one additional geological fact about each that Sophie incorporated into her records, immediately pencil flying, at 2 o'clock. Sophie fell asleep on the couch with Gerald, which was a Sunday tradition that Noah understood would eventually end and tried not to think about. He and Vivian sat on the back porch in the cold November afternoon shoulders, almost touching, saying things and not saying things in the comfortable proportion of people who figured out they have time. Diane called me, Vivian said. The friend from the dinner. The one who said I seemed smaller. What did she say? She said she'd been following the news and she was glad I was okay. And then she said... Vivian paused. She said she never stopped being my friend, that she'd just been waiting. She was quiet for a moment. I cried, which I was not planning to do. Good, Noah said. The crying or the call? Both. She leaned back in her chair. I have a lot of phone calls to make, a lot of connections to rebuild. Julian's long game was isolation, and the reversal of that is... She exhaled. It's work. You're good at work. I'm better at work than I am at anything else. You're better at some other things than you think, he said. Sophie's inventory now has 3 expert annotations. Geological knowledge is just retained information. It's not the geology. He looked at her sideways. It's the listening. You listen to her like what she's saying matters. Like the rock collection is a real thing worth understanding. Not every adult can do that. He paused. Not every adult with your kind of day job would choose to do that. Vivian looked at the yard. She makes it easy, she said quietly. She looks at things like they're worth looking at. A pause. She gets it from you. Noah let that settle. She gets it from her mother, he said. But I've been trying to keep it going. You're doing more than keeping it going. They sat in the quiet for a while. The afternoon light was getting low, the early dark of November coming in at the edges. I should go, Vivian said. Not reluctantly, practically the way someone says it when they mean it, and not as a signal for protest. Okay. Next Sunday. She looked at him. If that's... Yes, he said, before she could finish. Something in her face did the thing it did. The arriving of something before she'd prepared. Okay, she said. They went inside. Sophie was still asleep. Vivian found a notepad on the kitchen counter and wrote something and left it next to Sophie's hand. He didn't read it until after Vivian left, and when he did, he saw that it said, "The Oregon Obsidian is officially the crown jewel of the collection. V. Cross Geological Expert, certified by S. Bennett." Sophie would wake up to that, and Noah knew exactly what her face would do. At the front door, Vivian stopped. She was holding her jacket and her keys, and she looked at him in the entryway of his house, the same entryway where she'd stood dripping on his floor at 2 a.m, 4 weeks ago. One shoe in her hand, and her eyes the eyes of someone who'd been running. "I don't need to borrow your safety anymore," she said. The words were simple and direct, and cost something, which was how he knew they were true. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to share your life. Slowly. without anyone disappearing. He looked at her for a long moment. Everything he might have said, assembled, and then simplified down to the thing that was actually true, which was what she'd asked for from the beginning. "The door's been open for a while," he said. "I was just figuring out if I was brave enough to walk through it." "Are you?" He looked at the woman standing in his doorway, the CEO and the person who'd cried privately in his bedroom, and the geological expert on Sophie's official inventory. All of it. The same person, none of it. A performance, and felt something settle in him, with the particular finality of something that has found where it belongs. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She didn't move toward him, and he didn't move toward her. That wasn't what the moment needed. The moment needed exactly what it was. Two people standing in a doorway, clear-eyed with their histories on their backs, and their damage accounted for, and something real between them that neither of them had planned and both of them had chosen. She left. He stood on the porch, and the cold November air came in, and behind him, Sophie slept on the couch with Gerald tucked under her arm, and the note on the kitchen counter waited to be found, and the cracked clock on the stove read 3:47, and the kitchen drawer held page 18, and on the refrigerator, Sophie's purple marker Wi-Fi password still announced itself to anyone who needed to know. His house. His life. All of it real. All of it earned, all of it carrying the weight of what had been lost and the weight of what was beginning and holding both without breaking. That was the thing about things that actually held. They didn't hold because nothing was ever placed on them. They held because they were built right honestly carefully, without shortcuts by people who knew the difference between what only looked solid and what actually was. Noah Bennett went inside, closed the door against the cold, and let the future in.